If you enjoy playing Kenshi as much as I do, please like and subscribe. I'll continue posting videos with tips, tricks, and information about the game, as well as simply sharing my playthrough.
Welcome back to another Kenshi playthrough video. In this video, I'm going to talk about weapons grades. This is a pretty simple topic, but if you're new to the game, this may be confusing to you, or this will at least help clarify for you if you're new to playing. And this is important to understand if you want to understand weaponsmithing, which I'm going to talk about in a totally different video because that is confusing and complicated, in my opinion, to understand when you're first playing through. So, first thing you want to understand is weapons grades. So, it's pretty straightforward, but the first thing you're going to want to know is that they start with they're basically three tiers of weapons, kind of four, which I'll talk about, but there's basically three tiers that you can craft. The first one is going to be basic weapons, and these are the weapons you'll usually start and see on characters throughout the or grades of weapons that you're going to see on characters throughout the early part of the map, like near the hub and whatnot. And lower level characters will usually have these grades of weapons on them. That's going to start with rusted junk and then move on to rusting blade. Rusting blade, not to be confused with rusted junk, but they both are not great. And then you're going to move on to mid-grade salvage. And then I don't have an example of one here for some reason, but the next one above that is going to be old refitted blade. And then you'll get to refitted blade. Those are basically the basic weapons grades. Then you're going to move on to what I call the mid-tier weapons grades. And forgive me if I say this word wrong, but this is how I say it. I say katun, katun. So there's a city called Catan in the game. Let me know if you think that should be pronounced differently. That's maybe it's Caton. I call it Catan. But you'll find Catan number one, two, and three. And just know that one is lower than three is better than one. So that's just the way to think about it. And that's the mid tier. And then when you get into the high tier, you're going to find mark one, two, and three. And then just above that, you're going to find edge type one. I don't have a combat cleaver edge type one. I did, but somehow I misplaced it. Go figure. I don't know what happened to it. Anyways, we have a longsword here that's a edge type one that my character crafted. So those are the basic, all the three tiers that you can get to, and then there's one last tier that you'll find throughout the game, and that's a my two. I usually say this wrong probably too, but that's how I say it, my two. That is the a grade of weapon that you'll find usually on a special character. These are supposedly ancient blades that were manufactured thousands of years ago, and they never break and never rust. And they were made with ancient technology that's long been lost, and are really good weapons if you find them. So that kind of covers weapons grades. The other thing I'll just mention is that the way you could tell, like if you're not sure if one weapon is better than another, just coming over here to, for instance, this Mark II, you can see over on the right has cutting damage and blunt damage and blood loss. These might change a bit as you go up. So the higher it is, the better, obviously. But for cutting damage, this is 0.93, whereas this is 0.99. Blunt damage Mark II is 0.77, Mark III is 0.84. So they just do more damage. The other thing you'll notice, last thing to keep in mind, is that the weight of some of the weapons, I think katanas and some of the other weapons, they'll stay pretty much the same throughout the different tiers, but some weapons get heavier and heavier as you go up the tier. So, for instance, you'll see the Mark II is 15 kilos, the Mark III is 16 kilos. The my two one is 28 kilos. If you ever lift kettlebells, you know how have an idea of how heavy that stuff is. Whereas you go back down to rusted junk and it's only 6 kilos. So another thing to keep in mind is that the your ability to fight with the weapon is going to depend on your skill. It's also going to depend on how fast you hit. It's going to depend on dexterity and your strength. So you're going to need higher strength and more dexterity to wield those heavier weapons. So that's just another thing to keep in mind for your characters. Now, when I play through, I typically, for the most part, when I find a weapon that's better, I just keep it and use it. But if you really want to focus on training up your dexterity, you're better off fighting with lighter weapons as opposed to heavier weapons. So that's just one thing to keep in mind that you might take into consideration when you find better weapons. Maybe you want to keep it and save it for later, but you might be better off fighting with a lower grade weapon when you're, lower level and starting out. The other thing about that is it'll take you longer to kill enemies with a lower grade weapon, so maybe you get a little more XP. These are just some tips on weapons grades that might affect your the way you approach the game and strategy. I don't really bother with all that, but for the most part, but it's something to keep in mind. It might affect your leveling of your stats a bit. So just think of higher level characters get higher grade weapons, lower level characters, maybe they have lower weapons if you want to approach it that way. Anyways, that's all I have about weapons grades. In another video, I'm going to talk about weapons smithing because weapons smithing is a confusing topic in itself, in my opinion. So I'll cover that separately and try to clarify that for you if you're new to the game and just getting started, or you've gotten confused by it and don't really understand what's going on because I was that way for a long time. All right, thanks for watching.